Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shamir Sajdev, and some of fintech's hardest hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today I'm joined by Martin Kennington, Director of Marketing and Customer at Cynergy Bank. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Shamir. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, look, let's just jump straight in. Best place to start really is for our audience. It'd be great if you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey so far, and how you ended up at Cynergy Bank.
Sure. Yeah, it's been feels like a long journey, but it's been a bit of a roundabout journey. I started off when I graduated thinking I was going to be a journalist, so I did that for a few years, editing some magazines, and actually really enjoyed it because I love writing. I sort of felt like I was being creative in that kind of industry. And then probably sort of 5 years into that, I joined the dark side, went to marketing and thought, okay, this is really interesting. I can still be very creative, but there's money here as well to spend and campaigns to run. And it was really interesting. And that was in the world of video games. So it was, different kind of universe. This is going back sort of 15, 16 years. And that was a really good sort of proving ground, I guess, for where I ended up, which is in finance and fintech, because it showed me, how to market to very, very different audiences. And also new tools were coming on. I mean, when I was there and we were doing games like WWE and Borderlands and part of GTA, and the digital marketing plan back in those days was have a MySpace page. It was that was kind of as far as we went. It was pre-Facebook, and then sort of Twitter came on, Facebook came on. And then about sort of 13 years ago, left that, went into finance, went to work for another bank, which was great. We had a lot of sponsorships, so we had a lot of kind of activation, seeing a lot of the offline world as well as the digital world. And then I thought, well, actually, I'd quite like to do something a bit more grassroots again. So went to a small sort of kind of a startup, only around a few years, a lender that did lent money to owners and buyers of classic cars and supercars. So we were sort of selling the finance, if you like, for Lamborghinis and DB5s and these amazing things. And I was lucky enough that I got to do my Jeremy Clarkson impression and film some videos to review them, because it was like, we'll create the content and our customers will like it and then they'll come and get finance. So that was a really interesting world. Then I joined a company called 365 Finance, which was, it still is lending to SMEs through revenue-based finance and embedded finance. And again, a really, really interesting fintech model there. Started off with about 20 people. And then I left there last year. I think we had about 70 people now in multiple markets. So it was one of those kind of quite fast growth companies and industries. And then in September, I joined, so last year in 2024, I joined Cynergy Bank. It was a really, really interesting proposition that drew me in, because it's fast growth, it's sort of high touch, it's high tech, it's got a lot of fintech integration. It's on that journey for sure. So there's still a lot of work to do on the fintech side and on the marketing side and the branding. But it has this like amazing foundation. So I wasn't sort of coming in completely cold. A lot of amazing work had been done there on the marketing side and a lot of the integration. So it was a really interesting thing to come into, and a fantastic team to join.
And yeah, before we jump in, I suppose it'd be great to understand, a little bit more about Cynergy Bank. Who's your target customer? What sort of products are you focused on?
We're primarily a mid-market lender. So we have a lot of property businesses, hospitality, healthcare, etc. These are the sorts of businesses borrowing, say, sort of 20, 30 million in construction and property deals, for example, but also the wider SME set of businesses that need banking services. So business current accounts, business savings accounts, those sorts of things, and also some retail banking as well. So it's an interesting mix. And I think we've carved out this niche, particularly in that mid-market space, to own that, where your high street banks are really looking at the enterprise, the huge businesses, and they're not really supporting the rest. And your other, I guess, challenger banks and neobanks are very often looking at the lower level, so the sole traders and those sorts of businesses. So we're in that sort of middle space, which is, I think as the government have been saying themselves, it's kind of an underserved sector. We found that I think something like 50% of businesses who seek funding and are rejected don't then talk to another lender. So we found, there's some challenges there that we have to address as an industry. But yeah, it's a really, really interesting business, really interesting bank. Our tagline is the human digital bank. So we're very much focused on that fintech, tech integration, AI, etc. But on the other side, humans. It's people it's the relationship managers who look after these businesses, look after the SME owners, make sure they've got what they want and support them. But the tech, I guess, enables and empowers them, because I think the end users, our customers, if you like, yes, they love to know that we're sort of tech enabled, that we're part of that fintech ecosystem. But really, they just want to know as well that they have someone they can talk to if they need to, because they've often got very complicated businesses, complicated situations. And we don't want to have that kind of computer says no, full AI automated approach. It's got to be that balance of kind of high tech, high touch business.
You said the dreaded word there. You said AI. I'm not going to ask any questions about that just yet. Otherwise, we'll spend the entire episode just sort of talking about that. But I do want to come back to that. What I do want to talk about, sort of to begin with, is that path of scaling without losing identity. But it's sort of a precursor to that. In terms of the fintech space, how do you think marketing within the fintech space has evolved, I suppose, over the last sort of 10 to 20 years or so? You talked about sort of the safe things that people were doing in terms of search, online press. How do you think that's now changed with, I suppose, social and TikTok and influencers, for example?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the brakes came off in the last few years, certainly. I think there's been times, particularly around COVID, where everybody sort of seized up a bit again and went a little bit traditional, or kind of stopped spending and stopped thinking about implementing marketing tools or even the channels, looking at their marketing mix. I think they went back to being quite traditional again because it felt safe, and they had smaller budgets. So all test and learn kind of went out the window. But I think we're back in that space now where, 10 years ago, it was very much driven by those traditionals. But it was a good mix of outdoor, print media, PR, the digital channels as well. Whereas now I think, the balance has really shifted, where people are far more interested in the paid social. People are far more interested in, something we've talked about, which is influencers again. People are far more interested and actually willing to commit to a lot of those channels, where even quite recently, I think people were pulling away from those. But I mean, it's changed so much. I think anybody who maybe came into this industry as a marketer, even 5 years ago, would say, wow, I mean, how things have changed. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that FinTok was like, in TikTok was a kind of a new thing. And now it's like, well, everyone's doing it. And the ones who did it well first have done really well. Even on, X and some of the other channels and LinkedIn, where you see some brands like Monzo they've got a voice, which they've stuck with. Duolingo have done really well. They've got a voice. Wise, there's a lot of kind of tech companies and other banks as well that have done really well. But I think it's just changed and the brakes are off. And for me, I'm really excited about how that's moved the conversation on. And I think the boardrooms of the world and the boardrooms of the fintechs have really woken up to that, and they've understood actually that there's this huge opportunity, and we don't have to be sort of driven or sort of myopic in our view of just looking at single channels. They're looking at the whole mix. And also, I think, to a degree, the budget can go a little bit further now than it used to, because we're not so constrained. We don't want to sort of do piecemeal, pound here, pound there. But I think to a large degree, we can sort of split the budget a little bit better across those channels and get a little bit more overall share of voice, and, hitting that classic, making sure that your customers are seeing you X number of times instead of just sort of hoping that everybody sees you on one channel. So it's changed a lot.
The social space, the digital space is, it's got a lower barrier to entry. The out-of-home traditional stuff always had a high cost, so it's allowed brands to reach their audience and then also really, really focus on that audience and the niches that exist within their audience without having to stump up for really sort of high cost of doing out-of-home and then having a lot of leakage with their budget as well at the same time.
Yeah.
But I mean, we were speaking about this in the lobby, weren't we, about the influencer piece, the budgets, kind of, weren't there sort of back end of 23, 24. And now all of a sudden, they've now come back and they're, brands are being certainly considering being a lot more experimental with that budget. And I think, the CFOs have taken off their wartime hats now, and they're allowing marketers to, wonder and dream a little bit more. But I do think the financial services space, fintech space, is still behind other sectors. And so I still think, there's a way to go, but that's also quite exciting as well. because I think that creativity will continue really, and there'll be a lot more opportunity out there.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It's a good phrase, the CFOs are taking off their wartime hats. I think that's true. I've definitely seen that more. And I think it's kind of our space as fintech marketers to bring them on that journey and get them to understand, because, it's very easy to show on traditional channels, well, we've done this forever and this is our return, and we'll turn the tap on or we'll turn it off. And we're kind of okay with that. Whereas you've got to kind of bring everybody on that journey with you and say, look, we need to try this new stuff. And some of it will work and some of it won't. But some of it will no doubt be incredible and you'll get fantastic ROI. And it may become your primary channel or your secondary channel after that. But I think it's, it's kind of helping them take that hat off to some degree and bringing them on that journey.
We did a pitch actually for quite an established trading platform. We had these 2 slides, and the first slide was, the brand in the middle and their competitors around it. And I think the line was, this used to be your competitors. And then the next slide was, but now you've got to compete with all of these guys too. And it had all of these challenger fintech brands around them. We were trying to demonstrate that you're focusing on kind of these core channels, that search, that out-of-home stuff, but all of these other challenger brands are doing all of these social channels. You're not doing it at all. You're totally missing it. And I've got to be honest, all of the other challenger brands have to build trust. They have to build, that credence with that audience.
Yeah.
But you as an established brand could go into that market space and actually really scoop up a lot of that audience if you do it well. They never got it signed off in the end. So, there we go.
Yeah, never changes.
Yeah, exactly that. So I want to talk about scaling without losing identity. And so I suppose as a starting point, what does that mean to you in the context of being a challenger bank?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because you've got to, I suppose, almost by definition as being a challenger bank, you're looking for scale because you're not in that established sort of space. And particularly as a neobank, you don't have branches, you're fully digital bank. So you're looking for scale while everyone else is doing the same thing. So we're never kind of playing in isolation. The established banks, yes, they will look for their version of scale. But I think challengers are on a different level. We're looking at very, very fast growth, high growth at the same time. And the challenge is exactly as you say, it's how do we do that, but not lose things like levels of service, things like, showing the trust in the brand, sticking to our values, all those sorts of things, because it's really easy to lose sight of those as you scale, both in terms of how the business operates. I mean, even operationally, as you get more people in or more, you integrate AI or you integrate operational efficiency, you bring in more agencies and support, anything like that. There's always that risk of leakage at any of those points of people not really understanding what the brand is about. For us, it's kind of in our, it's a bit cheesy, but it's sort of in our DNA being that human digital bank that we're always thinking, what does the customer want in terms of human interaction? And we're going to retain that whatever happens. And it could be down to the level of, we've just launched, or sort of to tail end of last year, we launched a new version of the app, and including business services on that as well. And one of the tools which is great, which sort of links that, I suppose, in real terms, is you can book time and get time immediately in calls and FaceTime calls with your relationship manager through the app. So you don't have to go offline, you don't have to get out of the service to do that. You're kind of in that whole ecosystem. And it seems like quite a simple thing, but it's, I suppose, an example of how those two things, that kind of human digital thing, marries together. It is always a challenge retaining the brand. It does help if you have any sort of motifs, or, if you've got a particularly strong logo, or if you've got motifs or something you can carry through, or strap lines, that sort of stuff you can carry through all of your creative. We're always looking at that kind of omnichannel approach. So like you said, you've got a lot of those brands that could play in any channel if they want to, and they don't sometimes. And for us, we have a very, very wide mix of channels that we operate on. But we want to make sure that, yes, there's nuance to it. So we don't necessarily write in exactly the same way as we would on LinkedIn versus Facebook, for example, or Meta. So there are nuances, but at the core of it, there's those brand values. You've also got to have a great marketing team. So you've got to have people on your team and the agencies and your support and your content writers who really know. And if you said to them, kind of, can you write 100 words on what our brand means? They would all be able to do it.
Yeah.
Arms behind their back, blindfolded, and that really, really helps. So I suppose there's a little bit of kind of quality control in there as well.
What do you think some of the risks are, particularly fintechs when scaling?
There's big risks of, in some ways, putting all your bets on one market, and that could be the channel you're operating on, or that could be the audience you're talking to, the type of customer you're seeking. You could go kind of too far in one direction. Luckily, generally challenges in fintechs are sort of small, nimble enough to pivot quite quickly and make those adjustments. And we've all kind of lived through the training in marketing of test and learn, try something, see how it goes. Stuff won't work, stuff will. And that tends to mitigate some of that risk. But there's a big risk of that. There's also the kind of risk of getting a bit too big too fast. You know, we've seen it with some of the fintechs where they'll really, really kind of explode and there's a huge amount of excitement about it and everybody's called a unicorn or everybody's trying to get that valuation and they do lose sight of that core offering and very often it's service that falls apart. So I think it's as long as you don't lose sight of the number one person, you know, which is your customer, that number one person who everything should be driven towards, treating them fairly, giving them what they need, giving them the information, support, etc. You know, absolutely everything should be driven to what they want. And those principles kind of apply across the board, I think. So, yeah, there's a big risk of losing sight of that if you're scaling too quickly because you can't handle the volume almost.
Who do you think sort of in the fintech space or perhaps beyond has managed to scale successfully and then still maintained and preserved its identity?
I mean, I look at a company like Wise. I think they've done really well. And I say that I don't know an enormous amount about their business, but I look at all of their content all of the time because I just think they've got some really interesting content. And I've seen the scale of that business grow. I think Monzo did a phenomenal job early doors. They've maybe leveled off a bit now, but they were, you know, super, super high growth. And for all intents and purposes, everything I saw about them, their brand identity, that sort of coral color, they maintained it. And I think they kept that going. I think there's definitely some other businesses that probably haven't done that so much. And I think there's that risk of, you know, a great business, I'm sure, but like Aberdeen Asset Management, I think where they rebranded.
Yeah.
I don't know the financial impact entirely that had on them, but obviously now they've just turned it back again because they went, oh, maybe that was a bit of a mistake 4 years ago.
Yeah, they tried to be cool and get rid of all the vowels, didn't they? And then now they've gone back to having vowels. It's just, yeah,
it's a total cliche, isn't it? How do you become fintech? Take away the vowels, you know.
It was literally that. Yeah. I imagine there's a creative agency out there that got paid very handsomely to advise on that, and
now they've rolled back. But I remember reading at the time, you know, one of the senior people there had complained to the media saying it's corporate bullying, I think was the phrase they used, because they said it's corporate bullying. You're also having to go at us, and we're like, well, okay, if you can't take a bit of a joke when you've just taken away all the vowels, you've got to sort of, you know, think about it a little bit more. But no, I would say it could be, you know, we'd sit here in a year's time and say, actually, they did a fantastic turnaround job. They revitalized their brand. And to be fair, I wasn't talking about them until they did their rebrand previously. Jaguar did this thing.
I was about to say, yeah.
Huge thing, very controversial, but everybody was talking about it. So you kind of think, you know, maybe they did the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, everybody, you know, poo-pooed on the Jaguar rebrand. I've got to be honest. I think it was, like you said, it got them front of mind again. You know, yes, they're going to lose a lot of their customer base, but that was the whole point. Their customer base wasn't actually buying Jags anymore, so they had to, you know, completely shift anyway. So, yeah, I think like Aberdeen, it might end up being a somewhat of a success story.
Yeah.
It's just the whole thing of, you know, no, was it? I can't remember now the phrase.
There's no such thing as bad news.
Yeah, no such thing as bad news. Yeah. And it's like, you know, is there any bad PR really? I think in this instance, you know, for both Jaguar and Aberdeen, certainly not.
Yeah, I mean, it's skyrocketed in terms of the eyeballs on them, and in particular like that with Jaguar, where it was a bit stagnant. No one was talking about them. I mean, I'm sort of a bit of a purist on the brand. Like I liked the old Mark, I liked, you know, but then I like the old Jags, like an E-Type, and I'm totally not their market, and that's fine. I'm not the market for Tesla as well, and that's fine. But I think they're, you know, they know who their market is now. They've gone all in. So I think fair play to them. They went all in on it, and you go, good luck to them. You know, if it works out well, again, there'll be an agency paid well, and there'll be their own people paid well, and they'll be thinking, fantastic, we did a bang up job there. If it doesn't, they'll learn. Maybe they'll do something else.
They were on their way out anyway.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got to throw a Hail Mary, haven't you?
Yeah.
And it'll pay off.
Yeah.
Talking about sort of brand evolution, I've asked this question, you know, a fair few times sort of throughout the podcast series in general. And we always talk about, you know, brand being more than just a logo or a strap line or whatever it is. Moving on from that, you know, how do you think, you know, businesses should think about their brand as an evolving entity?
Yeah, great question. I think it can become that sort of, what's the word for it? Is it a sacred cow? You know, where people are so scared to change anything because they go, no, but that's our brand, that's our logo, that's whatever. And, you know, they just don't want to move away from it. And sometimes they're right. I mean, nobody wants to be the marketer who's responsible for the new Coke in fintech, you know, where they have this kind of disaster. They launch a new product or a logo and everyone goes, oh, I hate it. And then you've got to come back. Very often now we're seeing a kind of an evolution of them instead of just throwing it all out the window, because you don't want to lose all of the sort of history. So, I mean, we're Cynergy Bank. So this business was formed around 2018. And prior to that, it was Bank of Cyprus, essentially. So there is kind of history there. And it gives a lot of security, I guess, to our customers to know that there's 30 years of history, not just sort of 7 or 8 years of history, and that sort of legacy as well. But we definitely don't want to be the sort of new Coke and the person responsible for that sort of thing. But yeah, it's an evolution. And I think there's also a bit of a risk of playing it too safe when you change it. I mean, it happens a lot in luxury and fashion brands where they have these beautiful logos and then they go, you know what, we're just going to go to a single typeface. And you see it a lot on LinkedIn. There's always, they post this, oh, look at all these amazing logos. Google changed from this, eBay changed from this, you know, every kind of company. And then they just go, no, we're just going to go for a black and white monotype typeface because that's clean, simple. And again, you know, it's a pretty safe thing to do. But I think sometimes you do have to be a bit bolder and change things up a bit more. And I've been through rebrands with other businesses and it can be quite painful. And you've got senior people in the business and boardrooms that are often reticent to do it because there's a cost associated to it. And also they might feel very personally attached to that brand. And it's like, no, this is my baby. We've grown this for 5 years. I don't want to sort of throw that away. And you have to kind of show them the benefits of the evolution of it. And again, it's where you need, I think, strong external agency partners to help you with that. Because if you're just doing that sell internally, it feels like an opinion. Whereas if you've got a good partner coming in saying, actually, this is what the market's doing and you're looking a bit staid and this survey says so and all these other things, I think you've got to come at with a bit of data to support it.
I didn't realise that obviously you were Bank of Cyprus. But I suppose, you know, looking at that, if you wanted to grow your footprint in the UK, particularly with SMEs, it's hard to see why an SME would start doing their business banking with the Bank of Cyprus. So actually that rebrand to Cynergy Bank makes a hell of a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think to that point, you've got to evolve, especially, you know, and it's got to be in line with what your business aspirations are as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're still on that journey now. We're still evolving. So not that long ago, even sort of last year, we had a much lower average lend was sort of closer to £1 million. And now it's about £15 million on average. So we've kind of gone up that sophistication curve. And that's an interesting journey because, again, the positioning is slightly different because we've gone from being on the sort of smaller to medium size of SMEs to the real mid-market, as I was saying. And I think you then got to adjust your positioning to a degree without losing all of your heritage and that brand equity, as you say. So it's a challenge and, you know, something we're constantly doing, I think, in marketing.
So we were talking about this earlier. You've sort of changed the balance between sort of how, you know, you're very sort of performance led before. You've changed the balance. You've now spending a lot more money on brand and more brand focused. Do you think that that's had an impact on the quality of customer coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things that when you start doing it, again, you can be a little nervous because it's quite hard to measure immediately. I mean, you'll get the sort of anecdotal evidence of, oh, wow, you know, we've seen all this PR coming out and it's driving phone calls. Literally, we've got people calling in and they're, oh, you know, I just realized you guys are doing this as well. Oh, I didn't know, you know, we launched a bridging product late last year and we had to PR it to get people aware that actually this is out there. And the same with our new business current account. We've got to ads do what ads do and they bring customers in and build awareness, etc. But you've got to support that with PR and brand building activity around it. And also because you've got this whole suite of products, if we're just sort of selling, if you like, one thing or you know, positioning one thing, it doesn't give the whole picture of what we can do for SMEs. So yeah, we've done a lot of work around that, and I think for us it's paid off. So it's made it's paid for itself, and it makes sense for us to carry on doing it. But we don't lose the performance. We just rebalanced. So we were very, very heavy on performance, and now we kind of rebalanced to make sure that we've actually got that long-term platform to build off. So things like the content, SEO, social media, PR, bit of offline as well, all those kind of areas and events and things like that. that we were maybe a little bit quieter on, we've kind of turned up the volume on those to give us that longer term growth base as well.
We always ask the question, when we get a brief in or whatever it is, are you looking for volume or are you looking for value here? And what we mean by that is, do you just want a volume of customers? In which case, let's go pick up apples off the floor and do the performance piece. But if you want the value piece, then we need to start thinking about the brand building elements. So we need to bring in social influencers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting when you put that question, because the answer is always actually we want both. You've obviously got to start somewhere. When you then say, well, especially when they're going to take it back to the board, well, we're going to have to start doing some brand work, and that's going to be a bit harder to measure, but it will have an impact on the quality of customer that you're bringing in. Suddenly it's like, well, like that piece, you need the data, you need to sell it in, and it becomes a little bit more intangible.
Yeah.
And that's always a problem that marketers have, which is, selling the benefit of investing in brand.
Yeah, I think it's like a story as old as time, isn't it, in our world? Because you have to sell it, and you can't necessarily just put a flat number on it. Unlike some of the performance channels, you can say, well, look, I know if I do this, you'll get this, and this will be the ROI, and it's generally easy to measure and plan for and forecast. Whereas on the brand side, you can do that to a degree, but they've got to take some of it on faith and say, well, yeah, you know what you're doing, and let's see how that plays out.
A very sort of direct question then. I mean, how did you approach selling in, the brand marketing piece to, I suppose, your stakeholders? How did that conversation go? What advice would you give to other marketers out there?
I was in a slightly lucky or fortunate position that conversations had already started there, and I've got a lot of strong advocates, I suppose, in the business for brand. So people who have worked at other brands who understand the value already, but it still required that level of a level of detail, sort of showing actually what does it mean? Because it'd be quite easy for me to say, we as a marketing team are going to focus heavily on brand this year, and we're going to achieve X, Y, Z. But the immediate question is how are you going to do it? And then how are you going to measure it and all the rest of it? So we have to show all that, and actually down to quite a good level of detail. We had to show this is what we're going to do. These are the channels we're going to operate in. This is sort of the split of the budget we'll be spending there. This is what we expect to do. This is what we expect to return. If it doesn't, this is how we'll adjust. So it has to be sort of quite detailed in the same way you would with any performance marketing plan. So I think it's always going in there with that kind of return mindset still. Even if you say, we're going to do this SEO project and you won't really see a return for 6 months, really, thereabouts. You've got to build in that sort of understanding and get them comfortable. And it's, as I say, I'm really lucky at Cynergy Bank because Nick, the CEO, Sharon, the COO, the rest of the ExCo and the senior leadership team there understand the value of brand and understand the requirement to build that brand, particularly in quite a noisy space. We've got a lot of competitors in the market and we're not sort of operating on our own as much as we'd like to be. They're getting louder and louder at the same time. So I suppose advice to marketers would probably be go in with your numbers, understand that, there'll be challenge and you need to show where the value will be. And also, it doesn't hurt to show what the competitors are doing and how they've changed, particularly if they've had that sort of switch, because it sort of validates a bit of what you're trying to say.
I think that's always a great catalyst for conversation with the stakeholders anyway, because they naturally don't want to fall behind what other competitors are doing in that space.
Yeah.
Talking about sort of that growth piece and I suppose scaling piece as well, you've invested more into brand and, rebalanced the budget between sort of brand and performance. But obviously that comes with investment. How have you managed that balance between investment in growth and then, I suppose, sustainability from an acquisition cost perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question because, again, it's one of those things where on the performance channels, it feels easy-ish to measure or pretty easy to measure. And we know that you can sort of turn levers here and there and it brings things up and down. And on the brand side, it takes a little bit longer. I think we've seen certain things that we've done. So, for example, we've gone much, much heavier on PR. So just last month, we launched the Cynergy Bank Business Births and Deaths Index, which is an index of the new businesses created versus those that in business terms have died, and where the difference is, where the split is around the country, around different sectors and things like that. And it gives a good kind of health score. So we have that sort of Cynergy Bank Business Health Score, which was something we could kind of put our stamp on and say that's ours now. We are the owners of that index, and it was quite a sizable piece of work, and it got picked up by a lot of the national media and a lot of the trades as well. So it's an area which we might not have done a while ago, because we would have thought, well, that's a content investment piece and you're not expecting the phone to ring off the hook with new leads straight after that. But what it does, it positions us as an expert and shows that actually we know how to interrogate data, and data is the heart of our business because we're a bank. So it's those sort of pieces of activity, I suppose, where, and again, you have to do it and see how successful it is, because we could have done it and we could have been perhaps unlucky and released it on a news day where there's something else significant going on, or somebody else could have got there first. So there was always a bit of risk around it. But thankfully it worked really well and we're sticking with it and we'll be releasing more of them. But that's probably just an example of where we've done that. We've done a lot more PR activity. We've talked a lot more about our deals as well, where we've had new people join the business as well, new products, all those kind of areas where we're trying to bring to life both what we do and the people in the business. And again, none of that is sort of driven to necessarily have someone phone up straight away or email or, submit a form or whatever to apply for an account or for lending. But it does start to build that picture of us in their head. And the more people see that, the more they understand. They go, yeah, I do remember them. And then it becomes, okay, now I know them. And then it becomes, okay, now I trust them. Yeah. And it builds in that sort of classic way. So it's sort of turning up the volume on all of those channels. And the return comes, as I say, we kind of see it anecdotally, but we also see it in the business. We hear it directly from people that we've got the new business coming in. Also, in time, the more we do that, it does drive down the performance channel costs as well, and the reliance on those, or the reliance on, intermediaries and other channels.
I was just sort of thinking about the index. So two things came to mind. One, it's fantastic for brand and eyeballs and PR. And also then you've got the benefit of the SEO piece for the backlinks, etc. as well. Yeah. And the second thing that I was reminded of is years back, we're talking maybe like 10 years ago, Confused.com done a similar sort of survey, and they did like the 50 most confusing things.
Right.
And I remember number 8 was why women find Russell Brand attractive. and I still remember that, but I think it's like one of my favorite executions of taking something, especially for a brand like Confused.com, taking something that's, a survey piece and then putting their stamp on it and then owning it. And they did that for a good number of years and it worked really, really, efficiently for them. Sorry, it's a bit of a sidetrack.
No, that's good though.
You mentioned the dreaded word AI. And so we have to absolutely talk about it. So you mentioned obviously, Cynergy Bank investing in, it's obviously a digital first bank. You've got no branches. AI is sort of taking us by storm here. How have you started implementing that, as a bank into, I suppose, your marketing first and then perhaps other areas as well?
Yeah, I mean, on the marketing side, I took a really long considered approach years ago with AI when it was first sort of coming to the market. We would test things, and back when it was quite janky, and even now, we know it's not perfect. I think it's been a great tool for research, sometimes for validation. But I think where it's going and where we've started using it a lot more is around data. I mean, in marketing, we have a lot of data as well, and it's actually having the ability, the time that's given back to you from doing it to interrogate, analyze that data, and then give you insight, because it's pure then. It's just a bit of data. We don't have to sort of inflect our own biases on it. This is data analysis and here's your output. It's kind of like looking at GA when you're looking at your site analytics. And it's using that and then, understanding then what to do with it is more, perhaps a bit more nuanced, and that's where the marketing brains come in, where our people make more sense. I think on the creative side, we've used it a lot less. So I have seen other banks and other challengers who've used AI images, for example, in their ads. And you see in the comments that you get that kind of uncanny valley view. And sometimes it works, to be fair, and sometimes it doesn't. And I've seen them equally where it's been stated on the ads, this was generated by AI, and videos. And sometimes, for me, a lot of them are kind of like wow moments. You go, oh, wow, it's really improved. Oh, they can render hands now. It's really different. But then other times you sort of go, it's a bit of a gimmick. I mean, there's, I can't remember the tool, but Google had a tool fairly recently where you could put content into it, just some text, and it would turn it into a podcast of two people talking. And I thought, wow, really interesting. I wonder if somebody does it, and kind of nobody really did much with it because it was just interesting. It wasn't kind of sustainable long term. So for us in marketing, I think it's mainly using it as a tool. And the same thing across the business. I think it's not designed to replace human abilities, etc. It's designed to give people time back and to give people faster insight, better data analysis, and all those kind of things that we have to do often in our day-to-day job. And if it can save everybody 2 hours a day or however much, or a week even, even better.
our view is not too dissimilar. We've started adopting AI and implementing it into some of our processes. I think, we're sort of working from, or the approach I'm taking is from the inside out. So start with using AI to help sort of improve, optimize our processes, create efficiencies. And then from that, look at, I suppose, improving delivery of our services to clients as well. And I see there's, talk about the data piece. I think the opportunity is going to be around, that ingestion of all that amount of data that brands have, and then pulling out sort of, real key insights. And I mean, suppose now it can be done, and, there's data scientists, analysis and all that sort of stuff that can be done. But I think it's about the speed of it as well. And what would perhaps be a, 6 or 12 month exercise will suddenly turn into maybe a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And then you can then react to it quicker. And I think that time saving coupled with, implementation of the results is going to be the big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like that computing power thing and, Moore's law of how things are sort of doubling over time. But, I remember back in the day, like the Human Genome Project, this is way pre-AI, would take a year to map a human genome, and then after a while, the processes got better, et cetera, the algorithms improved, and they could do it in minutes. And it's that sort of scale of within a space of a few years, things going so much faster. And it feels that way with, the new tech revolution, I guess, AI. It feels that way, that the pace, and the only danger we have, I guess, as fintech marketers, is it running away, a little bit too fast and we're not keeping up. But thankfully, like you said, it's every conversation we ever have includes it in some way. So I think there's always these sort of nuggets and everyone's got something to say.
I think everyone's worried about not keeping up with implementing AI. I think the reality is, it's a bit, the analogy I've been given was there was a lot of like paid media agencies that were, leveraging data scientists and stuff. And there's only a handful of agencies that went away and truly implemented it. And I won't give any names, but one of the largest agencies that did that, after a couple of years, I saw he actually did a podcast and he went, well, the data science piece was really good and it benefits our clients and, it helps us do what we do. But what we realized in the end was actually running an agency was about relationships.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, I know that we worry about it as marketers and we don't want to be left behind, but I think there's, we're always going to have that with any piece of technology. But, I think before it becomes really sort of truly embedded in what we do, I think we're years away from it. I'm not saying we shouldn't start working on it now, and should start working on it now in order to be competitive in a year or 2 or 3 years' time. I wouldn't park it for doing 2026 here. I'd make sure everyone on my team has ChatGPT and has access to the AI tools and let them play around with it and get that journey started and get that conversation started. So it's still a way to go. And before we jump into our sort of quick fire round, what's the future for Cynergy Bank and I suppose for yourself as well?
Is growth. We're on this fast growth trajectory at the minute. We're supporting more and more SMEs. As I say, we'd made that sort of shift into the mid-market and disrupting in that space, and we're already seeing results of that. So it's really scaling that up now. The bank is in that position now to handle that scale and really grow. So it's that the more businesses we can help, the better. So I think that's the sort of direction that we're going. I think for me, I'm most excited about how, as we've discussed, how we're going to grow the brand alongside that. And I guess sort of some of the topic is how the challenge we face of retaining our brand equity while seeing that sort of exponential growth.
Well, as I said, before I let you go, let's take you through our quick fire round.
Sure.
What podcasts are you listening to right now or you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, FML, and of course, I don't tend to listen to too many tech podcasts. I love Stuff You Should Know, Rest is History, Rest is Money. So some of those are kind of in our space that we work in. I love Comodo Mayo, so the film podcast. So for me, sometimes it's about sort of switching off. Other than the Rest is Money, which is kind of very much in my universe, I tend to sort of go more on the entertainment side.
Yeah, I go quite hard on the business stuff. And then after that, I'm like, I need to take a break from that. And then I suppose other than Cynergy Bank, what's your sort of favorite fintech brand, app or business?
It's a good question. I think, I think Wise is the one that probably stands out as having done some really interesting stuff. And they've got a great looking brand. Yeah, Wise, I'd say.
what books are you currently reading, if any, or what would you recommend to our audience?
At the minute, it's more listening. I've gotten into that sort of habit of, I get bored of a podcast after a while and I go onto an audio book. And I'm currently listening to Robert Peston's How to Run Britain, which I think came out a few years ago. And when I first got it, I actually misread it as How to Ruin Britain. I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. And then as I've been listening to it, it probably should have that title in a way. So that's quite an interesting one. And then I'm sort of on the side of that, I'm listening to an old, I can't remember the name of it, it's Adam Buxton's autobiography from a few years ago as well.
Cool. As for the last question, what's one thing that I haven't asked you that I perhaps should have?
I suppose we maybe touched on it a bit, but I suppose the question might be, is AI going to take all our jobs?
What do you reckon?
I don't think so. I think it's going to change some of them, but I think definitely, you know, as you were saying, we've got to keep on top of these things and we've got to keep ahead of them, but it's more adapting. And I also don't think that there's a computer in the land, an algorithm in the land that really can usurp a marketer's brain. When people have been in marketing for a while and they understand not just their industry and their sector, they sort of have the wider view. I think, I'm not saying that's me, you know, but but generally marketers, you know, we have a way of thinking, and I don't think it will get rid of that sort of intuition that we have. You know, there is a gut feel. When you see something, you see an ad, you know it's good or bad inherently and intuitively, whereas, you know, an algorithm maybe doesn't. It might say, here's the perfect ad. And perfection isn't really what sort of sells. Again, it kind of goes to that uncanny valley thing. If something's too good, it's bad.
Nice. Martin, thank you very much for joining me today.
Awesome, Shamir. Thank you.
Great having you on the podcast.
Appreciate it.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.